And let me just share my screen with you guys and we will get started. Okay, can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes, it's clear.
Okay, good. So as I mentioned, today's training is on fire dynamics and fire behavior. Typically, this class is more than a day. If you were to be through, if you were to take this through a college or university, it would be a multi-week class. It'd be a whole 16, 17-week class. If you were to take this in a fire academy, it would be roughly a 40-hour class. So today's training is going to be very condensed, but hopefully informative.
It's a living thing, Brian. It breathes, it eats. And it hates. The only way to beat it is to think like it.
The art of war teaches us to rely not only on the likelihood of the enemies not coming, but on our own readiness. You know yourself, but not the enemy. For every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. But if you know the enemy and know yourself, you can never learn enough about something that can kill you. Fire has two important combat advantages: the element of surprise and the ability to force us to fight it out in round. We often give our enemies the means of our own destruction. So fire is our enemy, and in order to be successful in combating our enemy, we must know how to fight it. Give me 1 second here, please. I'm going to ask everybody to please mute their microphones.
Bacha wanaringana kumbe wanakwatirana cyane nyambe nayo
Give me 1 second. I'm going to try to mute everybody here because they Hear people talking in the background. Why is learning about fire dynamics or fire behavior important? Knowing the dynamics of fire behavior and how it behaves will give us the ability to control it more effectively. It will also allow us to be more effective in putting the fire out, and will reduce the loss of fire and property, as well as ensure firefighter safety. Basic of fire science is what we're going to be discussing today. It's going to be, as I mentioned earlier, it's going to be a very basic course. We're going to get down to the fundamentals, and it's just touching a little bit of fire science. As I mentioned earlier, that the class fire science is typically much longer than just 1 hour.
In the mid-1800s, Michael Faraday gave a series of Christmas lectures for kids at the Royal Institution in London, and one of his favorite subjects to talk about was fire. Faraday was particularly interested in candles because inside their delicate flames, they hold...
Sorry.
In the mid-1800s, Michael Faraday gave a series of Christmas lectures for kids at the Royal Institution in London, and one of his favorite subjects to talk about was fire. Faraday was particularly interested in candles because inside their delicate flames, they hold some amazing lessons on how fire really works. Now, you might have seen fire described like this in chemistry class, but a chemical formula doesn't explain what fire is any more than a recipe explains what chocolate chip cookies taste like. The first thing we notice about a candle flame is all those colors. Hot things glow because of black body radiation, which we talked about in our video about the color of the universe. And down at the bottom of the flame, it's hotter, so it glows blue. And in the middle, it's a little cooler, so it glows yellowish, orangish. Inside of that flame, there can be hundreds of chemical reactions taking place. The oxygen in the air and the carbon and hydrogen in the candle, they don't do anything on their own. It takes a little outside heat to get things started.
Sydney Bowala, I'm going to ask that
Solid
you
fuels
mute
vaporize
your microphone,
ripped into
please.
smaller chunks. This is called pyrolysis, and you can't have a flame without it. You can sometimes see a dark cone around the wick where there's no fire. That's where vaporized wax is coming off the candle, but it hasn't started to burn yet. The hydrocarbons and oxygen in the air slam into each other, and their atoms begin to rearrange. Sometimes electrons in those atoms get into an excited state. When they come back down again, they give off light. That's why the bottom of the flame glows blue. Not all the carbon in the candle gets converted to CO2, so leftover carbon atoms come together and form tiny particles of soot, which heat up and glow orange and yellow like the hot coals under a grill. This glowing soot is where most of a candle's light comes from. Eventually, at the tip of the flame, all the soot is burned away, and we're left with only carbon dioxide and water floating off into the air. You can investigate all the different parts of a flame for yourself with just a cold piece of metal. Up here we find water vapor. In the yellow part of the flame, soot. And down just next to the wick, we can even recover unburned wax. Flames look really cool too. They're almost hypnotic. Wait, what was I talking about? Oh, right, shape. Gravity pulls cool, dense. In the mid-1800s, Michael Faraday gave a series. All the soot is burned away, and we're left with only carbon dioxide and water floating off into the air. You can investigate all the different parts of a flame for yourself with just a cold piece of metal. Up here we find water vapor. In the yellow part of the flame, soot. And down just next to the wick, we can even recover unburned wax. Flames look really cool too. They're almost hypnotic. Wait, what was I talking about? Oh, right, shape. Gravity pulls cool, denser air down and makes hot air rise, and this buoyancy is what gives flames their familiar shape. But if you light a flame in 0 G, say on the space station, it'll look very different. All the chemical and quantum reactions that make a flame glow can only happen where it meets the air. So even though they look like solid cones, candle flames are actually hollow. As long as there's fuel and oxygen, the flame will burn and burn. Why? See, it's not the molecular ripping apart that makes a flame hot. It's the formation of new molecules and new bonds is what creates heat. And that heat drives the chain reaction forward, vaporizing more fuel, slamming more molecules into one another, and making the fire burn on. Our species has been gathering around fire for thousands of years, telling stories, asking questions over a flickering flame. And that's part of what helped make us human in the first place. Stay curious.
So what is fire? As defined by the New Oxford American Dictionary, it's combustion or burning, which substances combine chemically with oxygen and air and typically give out bright light, heat, and smoke. Now that definition is pretty complicated. To simplify it, fire is simply a chemical reaction. Now, there are 3 states of matter: solid, gas, and liquid. Now gas is a liquid and wood is a solid. And they both burn, but not in a solid or liquid state. They burn as a vapor. Vapor or gas must be produced in order for them to burn. We're going to talk about transferring states. So wood goes through a transferring state. A solid piece of wood doesn't burn itself. If you take a piece of wood and you have an open flame and you run it across that flame, it's not going to spontaneously combust. It needs to go through a process called pyrolysis. Pyrolysis is where that wood heats up, turns into a gas, and it's the gas that actually burns. It goes through a transferring state, such as here. Solid, we have an ice cube, which is 0 degrees Celsius. It's in a solid state. As that heats up, it turns into a liquid, and then eventually into a gas as that heat gets much hotter. So liquid fuel, a good example of liquid fuel is gasoline or petrol. Its flash point is negative 45 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 42 degrees Celsius. And it produces enough vapor to flash. Solid fuel. Solid fuel, in order for solid fuel to burn, solid fuel would be something like a piece of wood, a table. Solid fuel needs to go through what's called pyrolysis, which is a thermal decomposition of a material. That's what I spoke about earlier, where the wood itself, that solid piece of wood, is not going to burn. It needs to heat up, break down, and offset the gases, and it's the gases that actually are burning. So what is fuel? Fuel is a material that stores energy. Why does this matter? Well, I don't know if you're familiar with the fire triangle or the fire tetrahedron, but fuel is an important component in order to have a fire. For the fire triangle, you have to have 3 things. You have to have heat, oxygen, and fuel. If you remove one of those elements, you won't have a fire. So without fuel, you're not going to have a fire. Without heat, you won't have the fire. And without oxygen, you won't have the fire. All 3 of those components need to be there. Now, later on in the fire service, they came up with a fire tetrahedron, very similar to the fire triangle. The only difference is the 4th element, which is a chain reaction. And that's when you have heat, oxygen, and fuel, the chain reaction is fire. I like to use a carburetor, for example. Carburetor, for those of you who are familiar with gasoline engines, the carburetor provides fuel and oxygen to have complete combustion of the engine. If it's too rich, if that carburetor is providing too much fuel and not enough oxygen, that engine's not going to start. You won't have combustion. If it's too lean, if it's providing too much oxygen and not enough fuel, again, you won't have combustion of that engine. You have to have that right mixture of air and fuel to have combustion. Fire behavior. There are 4 stages of fire, and we're gonna go through each stage here. We have the incipient stage, the growth stage, the fully developed stage, and the smoldering stage.
This chair is an example of a fuel-controlled fire. Note the 4 stages of fire: ignition, growth, full development, and decay.
Now, the incipient stage. The incipient stage occurs when there is adequate supply of fuel, heat, and oxygen. Fire is small and confined to the initial fuel that was ignited. In this case, it's the chair. And the fuel is heated to its ignition temperature.
Growth.
Growth stage. Additional fuel is
Growth.
involved. As you can see, the chair is starting to burn much more. The flame is taking over more of the chair, more fuel. It's getting more fuel. Convection draws in more air into the fire, and thermal layering starts to occur. Thermal layering is when hot gases collect at the ceiling and start to bank down. Remember, heat rises. Those gases are hot, so they're going to rise to the ceiling. The ceiling is kind of it has nowhere else to go. So as that heat builds up at the ceiling, those thermal gases are going to slowly work its way down to the ground. That's why they say when you're in a fire, you want to stay low and go. Not only is the air cooler, there's more oxygen, and it's also clear because all the superheated gases are rising to the ceiling. The smoke is hot, and that's rising up.
Full development.
The full development stage, the fire is consuming the maximum amount of fuel possible.
Full development.
As we can see here, it's taken over the entire chair. Fire may be ventilation limited or fuel limited. Ventilation limited, if there's no windows in the room, it's only going to be able to take the air or oxygen that's in that room. That's what I mean by ventilation limited. As far as fuel limited, if the chair is the only item in the room that can burn, the fuel is limited to that chair. And not all fires will reach this stage.
And decay.
Decay stage. The fuel is nearly exhausted. As you can see in the picture, the flame has consumed much of the chair. It's slowly running out of fuel. The intensity decreases or stops. Eventually, the fire will burn itself out. The decay stage is similar to the same as the smoldering stage. If additional oxygen is introduced to the fire compartment, rapid or violent fire growth can redevelop quickly. So next, we're going to go over different types of fire conditions. We have flashover. Flashover is the point between growth phase and fully developed. Again, I would ask Sydney, microphone, please. Flashover is the point between the growth phase and fully developed phase. All combustible materials in a room at once, as you can see by the picture here. Temperatures can reach 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit or 537 degrees Celsius. Very hot. And flashovers are deadly. Very few people, if in a flashover, will survive a flashover. thermal layering. I kind of touched a little bit on that in a previous slide, but we can see it in this video. See how the smoke is towards the ceiling. You could see the flames rolling over the firefighter's head towards the ceiling. Well, that's those superheated gases burning. Heat rises, and that hot air will go towards the ceiling. Those hot gases go towards the ceiling. Smoke, all superheated, rises towards the ceiling. And as those gases go towards the ceiling, those gases burn, and that's rollover. It's spontaneous ignition of hot gases in the upper levels of a room or compartment. And that video is a perfect example of that. Backdraft.
Check that door for heat, Tim.
Draft is caused by the introduction of oxygen into a compartment where the superheated gases and contents are already hot enough for ignition, but do not have sufficient oxygen to combust. And as we saw in that picture, he went up to the door. There wasn't enough oxygen in the room. And as if we refer back to the fire triangle, if we remove oxygen, we don't have complete combustion. And that fire had the fuel, it had the heat, but it lacked the oxygen. And as soon as that oxygen was introduced into the room, as soon as he opened that door, that room got a sudden burst of oxygen, and we saw what happened. It spontaneously ignited. Backdrafts are not common, but they do happen, and it's something to definitely be aware of. So this next slide talks about the fire timeline. So from 0 to 1.5 minutes, we have deadly heat, flames, and smoke. If you have a smoke alarm or smoke detector, that typically activates during that time. If you have a building that is sprinklered, the sprinkler will activate. Now, fire sprinklers are made to keep the fire in check. Sometimes they do put out a fire, but most of the time they will just keep the fire in check, meaning it'll keep the fire from growing. So in that first 0 to 1.5 minutes, the detection of the fire occurs. At the 2 to 3 minute mark, the fire is reported. Without fire sprinklers, the odds of escaping significantly decrease at this point. The 3 to 5 minute mark, typically the dispatch center is notified that there is a fire, and flashovers can occur at this point as well. Typically, people don't survive flashovers. And at the 5 to 8 minute mark, that's your response to the fire. Now, your response times may be a bit longer. Having been to both Kenya and Malawi, you don't have as many fire stations or fire brigades as we have here in the States. So your response times could be significantly longer. Here in the States, our typical response time is 5 to 8 minutes. So without sprinklers, fire growth is unrestricted. The fire will grow and consume the entire building at this point. At the 8 to 10 minute mark, firefighters are on the scene, pulling their hose and putting water on the fire. So if your response times are longer, which in some cases they are, that fire is going to consistently grow, and you're going to be prevented with a much larger fire upon arriving on the scene. This is going to talk about size up and reading smoke.
To put out a fire, you usually put some type of retardant on it, like
I'm sorry,
water,
I'm talking about the
baking
4
soda,
classes
or
of fire. My
sand.
mistake.
This will reduce its heat or deprive it of fuel or oxygen. But not all fires are alike. When extinguishing them, it's important to pay attention to the types of materials that are burning, as well as where the fire is located. Because using the wrong fire retardant can make a bad situation even worse. For example, water does a great job of putting out a fire in a pile of cardboard, but if you pour water on burning liquids, it will spread the fire further. And if the fire is in or around electrical equipment, somebody could get electrocuted because water conducts electricity. To make it easier to distinguish between different types of fires and determine what substances should be used to extinguish them, fires have been divided into classes. Class A fires involve everyday solid combustibles, such as paper and wood. As we've seen, these can be extinguished with water, which cools the burning materials, as well as helps deprive them of oxygen. Class B fires involve flammable gases, liquids, and some plastics. For example, fires fueled by gasoline or propane are Class B fires. Class B fires can be put out by applying chemical foams that blanket the area and cut off the fire's oxygen supply. Class C fires involve electricity and can occur in equipment such as copiers, light fixtures, fuse boxes, electrical wiring, and receptacles. These fires are extinguished by starving them of oxygen, a process called smothering. This can be done safely with dry chemicals such as monoammonium phosphate, potassium bicarbonate, and potassium chloride, all of which are non-conductive. Class D fires are a little unusual. They occur when combustible metals such as potassium, sodium, and magnesium catch fire. You will probably never encounter a Class D fire, but if you do, don't attempt to put it out yourself. Call your local fire department immediately.
So here we have some symbols of the different fires, fire classes that you would find on an extinguisher. Class A, ordinary combustibles. B, flammable liquids or gases. C, energized electrical equipment. Now, it says energized electrical equipment. One thing I want you to think about is this. We'll use a television, for example. If a television is plugged in to an electrical outlet, it's energized. And if that television catches on fire, it's an electrical fire. But if that television is unplugged and is on fire, it is no longer an electrical fire, and it's no longer energized. It becomes a Class A fire, which is an ordinary combustible material. So if you remove the electricity, it now becomes a Class A fire. It's no longer an electrical fire. Something to think about. Class D fires are combustible metals: magnesium, titanium, zirconium, sodium, lithium, and potassium. Magnesium, and you'll see some examples of magnesium later on in my presentation, but magnesium is found in automobile engines. So, and you'll see how that reacts a little later in my presentation. And then Class K are cooking oils and greases. Now, I understand you guys may use a little different model. I believe it's the European model. Your classes may be a little different, but the same principle pertains to that. This is going to be, this slide is going to be talking about size up and reading smoke. Now, there are classes dedicated to reading smoke. We're just going to briefly touch it because I believe it's relevant to fire behavior, and you can tell a lot about what a fire is doing based on the smoke itself.
Welcome to a short class on size up and how to read smoke. In this video, we're going to talk about fire behavior and some of the techniques that you can use that will not only enhance your safety, but allow you to make better tactical decisions while operating on the fire ground. Here are some tips that can help you locate the seat of the fire. First, look for the fastest moving smoke venting from similar size openings. Another technique is to look for the tallest smoke column. You can also look for black, thin, fast-moving smoke. Taking a look at this structure, compare the smoke venting from similar size openings, such as windows, doors, and the soffit and eave line to the roof. Where do you see the fastest moving smoke?
You can see this fastest moving
How about
smoke.
the tallest smoke column?
Sorry, right in here.
Can you see the thin, black, fast-moving smoke venting from the hole in the roof?
Right in this area here, if you could see my...
The steam conversion venting from the same hole is an indicator that attack crews are making a good push.
Steam
and are knocking
conversion
down
is the
fire.
white colored smoke that you saw.
It's important for firefighters to recognize the warning signs of hostile fire events, such as flashovers, backdrafts, smoke explosions, and rapid fire spread. Let's take a look at the warning signs of flashover. They include turbulent smoke, which is heat pushed and ready to ignite. Another indicator is rollover, which is licks of flame that can be visible in the smoke. Vent point ignition is when the smoke reaches its right mixture with air and ignites. Dense zero visibility smoke is dangerous because of the amount of fuel present. Firefighters need to increase their situational awareness so they can identify these warning signs before they occur. You might not be able to prevent a hostile fire event
What
from
you see
occurring,
there is
you
turbulent.
just don't want to become part of the event. Here firefighters are setting up for their attack, but are not recognizing the changing fire conditions.
Situational awareness.
Can you see the
is
turbulent
important when
smoke flow
fighting a
venting
fire.
from the doorway?
Be aware of your surroundings.
The key is to be proactive.
See the turbulent smoke coming out of the...
Here firefighters are caught off guard, placing them in a compromised position, forcing them to react and play catch-up. Be careful of porch or roof overhangs, which can mask turbulent smoke flow. In reduced visibility and up close, it can be difficult to identify. Remember also that ventilation, both natural and mechanical, can induce flashovers.
Remember, ventilation introduces oxygen into the fire. Now, ventilation is good when...
Let's take a look at what flashover looks like from the inside. Here we have a normal room with modern furnishings. As the fire grows and develops, it radiates heat out to the ceiling, walls, and surrounding furnishings. When they can no longer absorb any more heat, they radiate that energy back into the center of the room in what's known as retroreflective radiant heat energy, also known as thermal radiation heat feedback. This further intensifies conditions in the room, causing the surrounding materials to off-gas until the point where they all reach their ignition temperature and flashover occurs. Not only are conditions in the fire room unsurvivable at this point, but as the fire vents out the doorway, adjacent rooms will quickly become untenable as well. Proper stream application can control or even prevent flashover. Let's take a look at the penciling technique. Observe the firefighter in the center of the room. Using a straight or solid stream and directing short bursts toward the ceiling, you can cool the fire gases below their ignition temperature without disrupting the thermal layering.
You're looking through a thermal imaging camera. So
You'll notice after stream application that the flashover has been suppressed and conditions are lightening up to the point where firefighters can start to get out of a crouching position and sit upright.
And again, I would ask that everybody make sure that they're on mute.
Let's look at some warning signs for backdraft. Be on guard when you encounter tightly sealed or well-insulated buildings. Be watchful for windows that are smoke-stained. Yellowish-gray smoke is an indicator that high heat is present, making conditions ripe for a backdraft. Use caution when you encounter a lot of smoke in a specific area and little or no visible fire. Backdrafts can be extremely violent, but there are some safety precautions you can take that will help you avoid being seriously injured or worse. First, always wear your full protective equipment, including SCBA. Second, never position directly in front of a potential vent, such as windows, doors, or breaches in the building that the blast wave could vent from. Smoke explosions can occur during growing or developing fires. Watch out for an increase in smoke density or thickness, as well as fire gases getting trapped in void spaces. Notice that the smoke venting from this structure is volume pushed, very thick, and low velocity. Once a flame is introduced, there's a pop of the smoke, which can be classified as a smoke explosion. Regardless of how you define it, be careful, because one hostile fire event can lead to another. Always watch out for changing smoke conditions. Looking at the same location shortly afterwards, you'll notice that the smoke is now changing to turbulent flow. This leads to flashover and a continuous burn. Once flashover occurs, you can have rapid fire spread. One way to predict rapid fire spread is to look for fast-moving smoke in hallways, stairwells, and on the outside. Here we have a two-story multifamily apartment building with fire involving one unit on the first floor. Compartment 1 on the right is rapidly approaching flashover. Take a look at the direction and travel of smoke flow. Where the smoke goes, so can the fire, and this can help you predict the path of fire spread. As compartment 1 flashes over, compartment 2 on the left is showing turbulent smoke through the broken windows. The fire is now auto-extending to the second floor balcony, basically following the same path as the smoke. As compartment 2 flashes over, the fire rapidly intensifies. The school of thought is to use large lines when faced with a large body of fire. But if you're working with a smaller hand line with a large flow fog nozzle, don't lose composure, because you can still safely knock down a large body of fire from the outside by using a narrow to medium range fog pattern. This can give you greater steam conversion and a faster extinguishment over a larger area. For safety reasons, only employ this tactic when you're on the outside and not in the room that's involved. When greater reach and penetration is needed, you can switch back to a straight stream. Rapid fire spread can trap firefighters, so always have a secondary means of egress. Notice the turbulent smoke flow venting from the two windows on the second floor. This firefighter was lucky to escape. This incident occurred in Toronto, Canada in 2006 and trapped 5 firefighters. Fortunately, all were able to make it out alive. Black fire is a slang term and is used to describe smoke when volume, velocity, density, and color are at their worst. When you see it, don't be overly aggressive, because no one will be alive in that room or compartment. Take a look at the smoke and remember what you see. There's a lot of it.
See how that
Black,
smoke is pushing
thick,
out of that
and
upper window?
fast-moving.
Look at the color.
Basically, the smoke is
See how
acting
it's
just
pushing out
like
of the
flames.
eaves?
You may not be able to prevent a hostile fire event, just don't become part of it. Remember these safety tips. Vent, high to release heat. Quench, or cool it down.
Cool it down by putting water on it.
Flank, and don't be directly in front of the vent. I want to give special thanks to Dave Dotson, the originator and author of the Art of Reading Smoke program. As Dave's well known for saying, don't just be safe, make it safe. Thanks for watching.
So as we saw in that video, you could tell a lot by the color of the smoke. You could tell a lot on how the fire is behaving by what the smoke is doing, the color of it, how it's moving. Again, there's a whole class dedicated to the art of reading smoke. This was just more of an introduction as how it pertains to fire behavior. So if you ever have an opportunity to either go on YouTube or to attend any classes that talk about reading smoke, I highly recommend it because it'll be very beneficial. And that's an art or something that could be used anywhere across the world. Heat transfer. Heat transfer is measured as energy flow per unit of time. And it occurs when there is a difference in temperature between two objects. Heat will flow from a hotter object to a cooler object until they reach equal temperatures. That's why you see the smoke and the moving to the cooler temperature. When two objects have the same temperature, heat transfer does not occur. And the rate of heat transfer is dependent on two factors: the difference in temperature and the ability of the materials to conduct heat. Real quick, before we go on to the next slide, I know there was a couple of people raising their hands. I will give enough time at the end of the presentation to answer any questions that you may have. This presentation, without interruption, will just make it within an hour time limit. So I want to save questions to the end, but feel free to throw them in the comment section and I'll answer them. Or at the end, conduction. Conduction is the process of transferring heat to and through one solid to another. A good example of that is you could see on the right-hand side of the screen is putting the pot of water on the stove. Objects that have more tightly packed molecules are more efficient in conducting heat and dependent on thermal conductivity, area, and the difference of temperature. Radiation. Radiation is a transfer of heat in the form of an invisible wave. It travels in all directions, and it's not seen or felt until it strikes the object. Convection. Convection is the transfer of heat by the flow of gases or fluid from hotter areas to cooler areas. It also involves primarily smoke and hot gases generated by the fire and transfers from a hotter gas to a cooler surface. Remember, hot moves towards cold. The heat of the fire warms the gases and particles in the smoke. The hotter and less dense column of gases rises and displaces cooler, denser gases downward. In a building, the convection currents generated by the fire rise in the room and travel along the ceiling. And they carry the fire outside the compartment or room of origin and to other parts of the building.
Yes.
Known as the, wind effect. Wind influences fire behavior. Remember, when the wind carries oxygen, oxygen fuels the fire. Wind may also affect which side of the structure you enter on. As we can see here in the picture, the wind entering from the rear of the building. In the rear of the building, the flames, the smoke, the coming out of the front of the building.
Yes.
Do we want to enter the front of the building, or do we want to enter the rear of this building? The answer would be the building. The size of the
Those
structure
who
fire must include a
were
wind
discussing.
evaluation.
Yes. So we're discussing things. We
Wind is
discussed
flowing
a
through the
lot,
back of the building,
by
and
telling
that's
you
where, when you pull up to a structure fire, you want to
is
have an
looking
idea
for
where
that
the wind is
after
blowing,
incident.
so you know what side of the
Then
building.
he started to say this
Next video is
how
going to
the
talk
organization-
about flow path.
A flow path is the direction of movement of heat, smoke, and air from areas of high pressure to areas of low pressure inside and outside of a building. As combustion occurs, heat is released, causing higher pressure near the fire. Heated gases move upward and outward because of the pressure differential. As the heated gases move upward and outward, cooler, oxygen-rich air is drawn into the base of the fire. This is the beginning of a flow path. Once heated gases expand near the ceiling, the area of high pressure increases and moves downward until it is able to exit a door or a window opening. A neutral plane is established when cool air enters the lower part of the window and hot gases exit the upper part of the window. This configuration is called a bidirectional flow path and typically occurs in a closed compartment with only one opening. When multiple openings exist, unidirectional flow paths can occur. Several variables help establish this flow path, including exterior wind, size, proximity, elevation, and location of openings. The simplest form of unidirectional flow path occurs when conducting vertical ventilation. The open front door becomes the inlet and the roof vent becomes the outlet. Another form of unidirectional flow path is in a multi-story dwelling. Suppose an upper floor window breaks. A unidirectional flow path will occur when air enters the first floor door opening and exits the upper floor window. In almost all cases, unidirectional flow paths will establish with a low entry and high exit, or low to high. A special wind-driven unidirectional flow path can occur on one floor of a structure when a window on the windward side breaks and the wind increases pressure in the structure, forcing air through a leeward opening. Use of positive pressure ventilation can also create wind-driven flow paths. As flow paths are established, fire will grow and travel in the direction of the flow path. Let's take a closer look at flow path in a controlled experiment. This prop was designed by Adam St. John, a fire research engineer with ATF Fire Research Laboratory. Our prop is comprised of two chambers, or rooms, stacked on top of one another. They are connected by a third chamber, which simulates a stairwell. Movable openings, or doors, are found on either side of both chambers, connecting either to the outside or to the stairwell. The stairwell has two outlets to the outside, one of them simulating roof ventilation. As we begin, all openings are closed except the door on the left of the lower floor. When we ignite the fire, air comes in low and exits high, moving in cool and going out hot, in a bidirectional flow through one opening. Even when the door to the stairwell is open, the flow remains bidirectional. However, once the upper door of the stairwell is opened, the change is almost immediate, moving from a lower inlet to a higher outlet. This flow path is unidirectional and is caused by heated air rising. If you were to attack this fire against the flow path, it would be much more difficult to get water to the seat of the fire. However, if you were to work with the flow path, putting water in from the lower inlet that is taking in cooler air, the mist and water would flow along the flow path toward the seat of the fire. If the upper door were closed and the roof vent were opened, the unidirectional flow would be even more pronounced. This illustrates how improper roof ventilation can make a fire worse instead of improving the situation. If the upper door and the roof vent were closed and the door into the upper room were opened, the flow path would continue to be unidirectional, this time wrapping itself back through the upper room, igniting it and its contents. This illustrates that flow paths are not linear. They can travel in unexpected directions, but always according to the laws of physics. They will almost always flow from low to high. As a firefighter, understanding the elements of fire behavior, such as flow path, is essential to your safety.
So,
the next video, the next slide, we're going to see a series of videos that are going to show calls that have gone wrong. And I want to show this to you because this kind of reinforces the importance of how fire behavior or knowing fire behavior plays an important role in how you do your job. This next video is one of an electrical fire.
Yeah. So
putting water on the fire. And I want you to watch screen.
Fucking hell.
So that it's white. So that you should be clean. And you proceed with nothing.
I think so. I pulled away from it there because it's
That's why it's important to know how fire is going to react and how to extinguish different classes of fire. Now, he's very lucky he didn't. Water is a conductor of electricity.
500 south.
The proper way to handle and to keep surroundings moist, the ground was burning, and the power company to disengage the electric. Remember, as long as something is energized, it's considered an electric. Once it's de-energized, now it turns into a Class A fire, common combustible. Here's an example of a grease fire.
This young woman is live streaming herself cooking, but it's not going so well. She's causing so much smoke, she sets off the fire alarm in her building. But things are about to get a lot worse. Now she's in big trouble.
Oh, God. I don't know what to do, guys. I don't know what to do.
She runs out of her apartment screaming for help.
Help! Help! I don't have a fire extinguisher. I just freaked out. I was like, I don't know what to do.
Because that, it is
now, see, she took her pan
also looking at that. So they will
put it in the sink. Put out we saw how it reacted. Actually made it worse.
Now, whatever you can bargain.
Individual, the part of this video that you didn't see, she has a degree of engineering. So
not this one.
She should have known better. She just panicked. No reason why public education is so. I don't sharing your knowledge with the public. Teaching fire extinguishers.
There was a fire at
Everybody out! Everybody out!
In Blanta. Then there is fire 3 within 2 weeks. Bigger fires. So they are waiting to charge them.
Magnesium, and I had mentioned earlier that found
if that call came in the morning. So I'm delaying because of you.
Catalytic converters.
What
happened on magnesium?
Then I said, no,
what's this
for me tomorrow?
Fire?
So I would invoice. Ipite civic center. So I will invoice you on 750,000.
Well, it's a daughter, my neighbour's daughter. I guess you give him a ride. Hey, you give him a ride, eh? Home?
Oh, I can do, yeah. I was trying to speak to the cockatoos there, but I only keep it. I wonder if I could walk down there.
They might not let you till the fire's out because the gas tank could still explode. So the flame reaches.
I thought it was going to go before, but it's coming right on it, so.
Hose gets heavy. Hey? Struggling with that hose. The hose is heavy, eh? When it's full of water. Well, it's going to back up traffic for just a bit.
Hey.
It's a good thing I'm ahead of it. Whoa! One guy down.
Bloody tire, that was.
Was it the tire?
Yeah.
The ambulance was just there. He just went by on the other side.
He did?
Yeah, he was just here. One tire blew. It wasn't as loud as that.
It wouldn't be gas tank, otherwise
Big fire. So liquid, flammable liquid. Putting out a flammable liquid. The problem with that is the flammable liquid is lighter than water. Gasoline is lighter than water. And it floats on top of the water. Trying to essentially what they're doing is
so I
all around
send
and
those guys radar, you can have.
Now what they
so
should
that we get assured
with AFFF, put the blanket.
So I was the one who went there when I called my colleague.
You eliminate the oxygen
so that we should see.
and the fire goes out.
I was the one who was doing that. Yes.
So that's the end of our presentation.
Yeah, Smoke Max was my